on the next McDougall MD, a life-saving doctor. Is he a quack or a hero?
Join us and you be the judge.
Can you and your family be poisoned by chemicals in the environment? It's already happening to wildlife from Florida to the Great Lakes to Puget Sound. What's the danger? Our specialist will tell you. Plus, John reveals how to prevent hardening of the arteries. I'm Mary McDonough, and you're watching McDougall MD.
We're gonna have fun.
Oh yes, we always have fun.
I got some really important things to tell you about.
Okay.
Something that might be going on, in fact, possibly is going on in your body right now, and it's the leading cause of death and disability in all of Western society. It's a disease that damages the arteries and eventually closes them down, and it results in all kinds of conditions, and some of them that may really surprise you. We name the disease based upon the artery that gets closed down and the organ affected. Okay, so say for example we close down the arteries to the ears.
Okay.
We call that hearing loss. We close down the arteries to the head and we call it a stroke. We close down the arteries to the heart, have a heart attack. Close down the arteries to the kidneys, you have kidney failure. The arteries to the back, and you get back pain and you get degenerative disc disease, or in other words, ruptured disc. You know, people that rupture their disc, it's not because they pick up a piano, it's because the discs are degenerated, and that's because of low blood supply to the disc. You close the arteries to the legs, and it hurts when you walk, and eventually the arteries get so closed that the feet could die, and you get gangrene. Now I got one for you.
Okay. Tell me.
Close the arteries to the penis, and you become impotent.
Oh, okay.
It's not,
that makes sense.
It's not because men, as they get older, lose interest in women. It's because of bad blood supply. And that may be a stronger motivation to change diet than anything else for a lot of people. So this process that closes down the arteries, it's not a natural, normal thing. I mean, it's not part of genetics or getting older, as we've been taught. And the reason we know that is when you look around the world, what you find is there are parts of the world still today where heart disease is virtually unknown. Where people have very few strokes. Yet when these people, say from Asia that I'm talking about, or from Africa, move to the United States, and they change the way they live, and you've heard of some of the things I'm talking about, like not getting enough exercise. I wasn't going to mention that first. Or cigarette smoking. And certainly when they change their diet, what happens is they start to get this disease. Now, I'm going to tell you some things about it that you may think
Now, the official name of the disease
is atherosclerosis.
Okay, did you get that, everyone?
Atherosclerosis. It's very, it's not as hard as hardening of the arteries. It's atherosclerosis. And I think it's very important and very interesting to understand how it happens. You've got arteries, which are nice, clean tubes that are that the blood is flowing through. These arteries have a very smooth lining, internal lining that we call the intima. Not important, but internal lining is very smooth, and what happens is that internal lining, it gets injured. It gets injured by products of cigarette smoke combustion. It gets injured by antibodies, which are directed towards, say, dairy protein that attack the inside lining of the arteries. It gets injured by oxidized fat and oxidized cholesterol. So it injures the inside lining, and now that lining becomes permeable. Okay, so now cholesterol and fat get under that lining and cause festering sores. Now, we don't call them festering sores, we call them plaques. If we call them festering sores, people might get scared and do something about it.
Yes, they might start eating differently,
They might,
John?
But you can imagine kind of like you get a sliver of wood stuck in your hand. You get swelling, redness.
So it's different from clogging.
Well, I'm going to tell you how the clogging process takes place. This is how it starts.
Oh, this is
how
it starts.
The sores developing, like if you had a sliver of wood stuck in there, you get swelling, redness, pus would form in there.
An infection, maybe.
Right. But with your hand, you've got nerves in your hand, so it tells you that something's in there, like a sliver of wood, so you pull down.
Pull it out.
Right. In your arteries, you get slivers of cholesterol and globs of fat stuck in this skin on the inside lining of the arteries, and you can't feel it. It's a silent disease. It's silent until the last phase, when the artery completely closes down. Now, I want to tell you how that happens, because for you to understand this mechanism, Mary, will make it possible you understand all kinds of important things about the disease. The mechanism that happens is a tiny sore. Now, I want to say that word again, tiny sore, and we'll call it plaque from now on because we don't want to upset people, but a tiny plaque, it ruptures. And the process of rupturing acts as a catalyst to cause the blood to suddenly clot. It's not that these sores grow bigger and bigger and bigger and finally close off the artery. That'd be a slow process. You'd have warning time. What happens is suddenly one of these tiny plaques ruptures and causes the blood to clot, which closes off the blood supply. Now, the reason that's important for you to know is it explains why people who are, quote, perfectly healthy drop dead of heart disease. You know, you put your spouse to bed at night and you wake up the next morning and you shake him and he's not there. Well, he was perfectly fine when he went to bed last night. Well, he wasn't perfectly fine. He had all these little landmines, these little bombs sitting there ready to go off.
Well, how do we heal all the plaques?
Okay, that's the important part. Now, if you understand this mechanism, the fact that this ruptures which gets you into trouble, then you can understand how to get out of trouble almost immediately. As soon as you change your diet, what happens is you start to stabilize the plaques because you bathe them with the healthy blood and they're less likely to rupture. You also stop pushing the fat and cholesterol into the plaques, which overstuffs them to make them rupture. That's the first thing you do. Second thing you do is you remove the strongest clotting factor that human beings come in contact with, and that's animal fat. When you change your diet. Animal fat makes the platelets, which are blood clotting elements, get very sticky. They can hardly wait to stick together. And there are protein factors in the blood that we call clotting factors that want to spill over into this blood clot to close that artery down. As soon as you take the animal fat out of your diet, the blood safely and effectively thins. And then in time, you can actually measure the atherosclerosis reversing.
How?
Well, you do it with...
How do you do that? Don't you want to know?
You want to do it in a simple, safe way. You do it by doing artery dye studies. That's one way to do it. And you can actually see it reverse. But you don't have to wait for the months or years it takes to show that kind of reversal. As soon as you change your diet, you stabilize those plaques so they won't rupture, and you naturally and safely thin the blood. And therefore, you get immediate benefits. Of course, Mary, you can also get immediately back into trouble if you go back to that high-fat
way
food.
of eating.
And of course, we're talking about cheeses and meats and butters and so on, the things that are animal fat type products.
So it's really the low-fat diet.
It's a low-fat, high-plant food diet that people want to do to save those arteries, the same diet that cuts their food bill by 40%.
Oh, there you go. When we continue, we'll meet a man who knows why the fishing is best downstream from the paper mills. Do you know that?
Learning a new language can be difficult and discouraging, but it doesn't have to be. Hello, I'm Karen, introducing Hello Channel, the revolutionary new channel designed especially to teach English. If you can speak English, the future is open for you, since speaking English means greater opportunity and higher paying jobs. By watching Hello Channel, you are immersed in this valuable language. You'll hear the words being spoken. You'll see the speakers' mouths when they say the words. You'll read what's being spoken in large, clear subtitles. And you'll speak out loud, practicing what you have just learned. There is no better or faster way to learn a language than total immersion. Hello Channel does exactly that. There's programming on every level so you can watch the shows that are just perfect for you. Whether you've spoken a little English, a great deal of English, or none at all, the Hello Channel has something for everyone. Join us for a convenient, affordable, and fun way to shape your future. There's so much in store for you if you'll just say hello.
Our first guest studies the effects of environmental pollution on wildlife, and he's seen some shocking results. Join us in welcoming Dr. Glenn Vanderkraak. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Vanderkraak, good to have you here. You are a zoologist?
I certainly am, yes.
And so is most of your interest in environmental chemicals based on what's happened to the animals out there?
Most of my studies have been focusing on looking at feral populations of mostly fish, wildlife, wild populations of fish, birds, turtles and the like, and trying to understand how they're responding these days to the current environmental conditions.
You know, I read something in the paper just a few weeks ago about how the fish are becoming feminized.
There certainly has been a number of reports of feminization of fish. And
Which means what?
Well, what this means largely is that the fish are either displaying secondary, what we call secondary sexual characteristics. They're behaving far more like females.
The males are.
The males are.
Becoming like females.
Or they're producing female-like proteins in their blood, which is certainly a shock and a surprise to myself and many of the other scientists who have gone out and observed these.
And how common is this?
Unfortunately, it's far more common than one would hope for, and it certainly is turning out to be a response that's being seen on a global scale.
And what causes this?
Well, that's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
It's not what causes it. Unfortunately, it seems more often now that we're asking the question, what doesn't cause this? And that,
But this is natural. I mean, this is a change. That's why you see it.
well, it may well be natural in the sense that it's the same scope of responses that one might normally see, but it's not frequent that you would see fish producing
Male fish producing
male fish producing female proteins. There's a number of responses in gastropods, marine snails, where rather than feminization, there's masculinization. And parts of their reproductive tract in the females have male parts in them that's rendering those unable to reproduce.
This must not be good for future generations of fish and snails.
Well, it certainly is not, and the difficulty or the other big question is that many of the systems that are controlling reproduction in wildlife have been conserved, and the question is, will some of those effects be manifest in you or I, or more importantly, I think, in our children?
But before, I didn't get an adequate enough answer as to what caused it. You must have some thought of what causes it.
We certainly do.
I mean, there's got to be some change out there.
There's a number of chemicals in the environment that are causing these kinds of responses, and many of them are the bad actors that we've recognized for many, many years.
Familiar names?
DDT and its metabolites.
DDE.
DDE in particular, some of the PCBs and their metabolites, dioxins, and the like. And so, I mean, these are actors, some of which have been banned, at least in North America, for many years, but are still found in increased amounts these days for a variety of reasons. One, because many of these chemicals are recycled. Number two, many of them are transported through the wind, through water vapor. And so the activities that are going on in Mexico and in South America and Southeast Asia are problems on a global scale because of the transboundary transport of these chemicals essentially across the world.
They're still using these in Mexico where we get our fruits and vegetables.
They're certainly being used there, and they're being used in places in South America. And part of the difficulty is that some of those chemicals that were introduced, 20 and 30 years ago were very, very effective at what they were designed to do. And they're still being used in parts of the developing world. But we in North America and Europe and essentially throughout the globe are being, affected by them, or at least certainly being exposed to them.
And what should I be worried about the most?
What should
as far
you,
as the chemical poisoning and what
I think what you should be worried about the most is, in fact, we are exposed every day in our diet to a variety of chemicals, some of which could function to alter the functioning of the endocrine system, which controls growth, reproduction, development.
Breast cancer.
Breast cancer, that might be one. Prostate may be another. The issue is we may be being exposed to chemicals that we're unaware of that have that potential to cause those types of responses. And it's a question then of identifying what are the actors and at the same time establishing if and how they exert their biological responses or effects. And so it's in some ways a bit like shooting in the dark in terms of trying to identify what are the causative agents. Now, certainly we've made some major progress in that regard, and we've done vast steps in trying to alleviate some of the chemicals.
Well, are these chemicals also responsible for the decrease in sperm count in men that we've seen over the last 60 years?
Well, that's a I would rather view that as in a different way than you've stated it. You stated it as if it was a fact.
Well, there may not be a decrease in sperm count, but there have been a lot of studies that have reported it.
There certainly have been a number of studies that have reported decreases in sperm counts, but there are equal numbers that have shown patterns of response that vary across the country, for which we really don't have a great explanation.
And male abnormalities of the genital tract?
There certainly are a number of...
They seem to be increasing.
They certainly are increasing in places like Europe. Incidences of non-descended testes in young boys and the like. The issue there becomes one of, from my opinion, of saying, well, what was the cause of that response?
Well, let's declare those chemicals guilty until proven innocent.
Oh, that's would be John. And we'll be right back in a minute. And when McDougall McD continues, we'll meet a scientist who looks at the environmental problems from the human side. So please stay with us. I still didn't get the answer to that.
You can learn English by watching Hello Channel.
Joining us now is a man with the answers to some troubling questions. Dr. Warren Foster, welcome to McDougall MD.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Now, but first I have to ask you about this fishing downstream. Why is it better from a paper mill?
The reason why it's better simply is the fact that in the process of making paper and solubilizing trees, you create a whole new pool of nutrients that you release into the water, and that feeds the entire ecosystem
So
downstream.
Bigger and better down
Yeah, but they have more dioxin in them, don't they?
They do, but it's you can move that.
That's how you get 'em.
You can move that. It's sort of like smoking, in the sense that the fish are attracted to living there,
Yes.
and they simply didn't know that the chemicals there could be having effects on their reproductive
But,
development.
you know, I've heard warnings that eat a certain number of fish out of Lake Erie, or
Oh,
used
yes.
to be, that your risk of cancer has increased so many percentage points. I mean, is this true?
There's no question about that. And that's the whole purpose of having these fish advisories, because of the consumption, or not the consumption, but the biomagnification of some of these persistent organic chemicals that accumulate in the fats of the fish. So that's part of the dilemma. As the fish grow older, they accumulate these in the fat, and when we consume them, we take those in from what they have eaten. And so that can be a real significant problem.
How does your interest differ from Dr. Van der Krank's interest in this whole subject of chemical pollutions?
Unlike Glenn, my interest is focusing on what impact environmental chemicals may have on human health.
You say that
What
like a
is
politician
that?
when you say may. Come on now, don't you believe they do?
Well, what are they?
What are what?
What do I ask
Which
you the
ones
same
do you
question? What do I need
believe
to be
are
worried
true?
about?
I want to know that.
Well, first off, let's make some distinctions. We know that in certain wildlife populations there are effects, and that's a concern to us. We know that in manufacturing processes where people work in chemical manufacturing, they're being exposed to high concentrations, and we've seen effects there. But are the effects that we see there what we would expect to see in the general human population, in which levels of exposure are extremely low?
Wouldn't you?
We don't see it. There is no evidence that I have been able to find in reading the medical literature from the world that shows me that in the general human population there are effects.
Well, how about
There
the
That's
are-
cancer
for
we
a
just
period
talked
of
about?
time.
There are effects that are seen in people with high level exposure, such as the Inuit, Eskimos that live in the north, where they have high exposure because of the diet. Their subsistence diet is feeding on seal and whale blubber.
Well, how about the Michigan children who had a decrease in IQ because of the PCBs?
Yet
They
if
were
you
fed to their mothers. I mean, isn't that it?
and yet if you
Aren't
go to North
convinced?
Carolina with a similar type of exposure, and it's totally contradictory, and when you go and do a complete meta-analysis where you take all the studies that have been
Right.
published on the structure, on this subject, and you put it together, you find that you have an odds ratio of around 1. So that means that if you had high exposure, your probability of having lowered IQ is the same as if you didn't have
Well,
that
let me
exposure.
ask you. It sounds to me
So-
like you're saying the jury's out. I don't want to be
Exactly.
a human guinea pig to find out whether this really is poisonous or not. Wouldn't I be prudent to take every step possible to avoid these chemicals? I mean, how could you argue with that?
I would not argue with that.
What steps can I take?
And what chemicals would be the best to avoid?
Okay, 2 questions.
Yeah.
I'll field yours first. The bad actors, the PCBs, the dioxins, the DDE, DDTs, those are the things that we do know that are a problem. They've been banned in North America. They've not been produced here for the past 25 years at the very
So
least.
where would I find them the most?
Where would you find them the most?
Yeah.
They would, because of atmospheric transport coming in from,
Okay.
from all over
So
the
there's
globe.
nothing I can do.
They're going to be in the fat. They're going to be in the fat. They're fat-loving compounds, so they go into the fat. I love a steak. I'm not going to give up my steak, but I'm going to eat well, so I cut the fat off my steak.
But there's fat and marbled in the meat.
I minimize my exposure.
No, to
I'm
minimize
still-
your exposure, you trade it for a potato.
John,
That's
you trade it
minimizing
for
your
a
exposure.
potato.
But there are other chemicals present in a potato.
Rice.
I
Corn.
can eat rice.
We're cutting
No,
John's
isn't it true?
diet right
I
here.
really want. I do want to address this. Isn't it true that the lower you eat on the food chain, the safer you're going to be as far as chemicals?
True.
So people should eat as low as possible on the food chain, don't you think? Should they eat organic?
I don't know that you're going to have any improvement. If I thought that there was an improvement in doing that,
But wouldn't
I
it be
would agree
safe
with
to
it.
err on the side of? No one could
Agree.
say eating chemicals is
I
good for you.
agree.
Okay, so what else?
If,
Low on
if you
the-
would like to do that, if you feel there's a concern, John,
Yeah.
eat low on the food chain.
Well, I do.
Okay, now we're
Just
getting a
what
little
I
off
wanna
purpose
know,
here,
I
don't
want
we?
some practical information on how else we can lower our exposures, because nobody can say it's good to eat chemicals.
No, it's not. The problem is how do you avoid it?
That's what I want to know. We've got two of them out. Low on the food chain, buy organic. Is there anything
Cut
else?
off the fat.
Cut out the fat. If
Well,
you
eat a
What
low-fat
else?
diet, even avocados and things like that,
low fat diet, I
Low-fat
would
diet.
strongly suggest.
Because they're sucked up and it's concentrating those chemicals.
If you're going to cook,
Yeah.
cook in Corningware. Don't cook in plastic. How many
Oh,
people
really?
microwave in say,
Everyone.
a margarine container?
See, that's
You have
practical.
no idea
Oh, that's-
of what
is going
has
into
been in
it.
that thing and is coming out when you microwave
So
it. It wasn't
in-
designed for that purpose, so don't use it for
Or
that
in
purpose.
glass.
Use
Oh,
glass.
that's great.
These are the
We're
kind of
gonna
practical things that we
This
wanna
is
get
what,
to.
yeah, when we'll be back with more of these practical tips. Don't go anywhere.
Just say.
Just say.
Just say.
Just say.
Just say.
Just say.
Just say,
Just say.
Just say.
hello.
We know where they've taken her.
We are here to save the princess.
But the princess is sleeping.
Imagine what a little time can do for your family.
And welcome back. We have Dr. Foster, Dr. Vander Krank, and the subject is environmental chemicals. Just a few weeks ago, they had an article about Michael J. Fox and him suffering from Parkinson's disease. And about the same time, they had an article in The Lancet that said there was an association between pesticides and Parkinson's. Do you folks have any comment on that possibility?
I think it's a reasonable hypothesis, and the evidence there is weak at this point in time, but it's a hypothesis that needs to be tested. And until it is tested, we really can't say one way or the other.
But it does need more
but
research.
it does need
and
to be
looks-
done.
So we have a lot of different problems. We have hormone-related problems, we have cancer problems, we have Parkinson's, other damages to the nervous system. I mean, how high does the level of evidence have to get before stronger stands are taken on pesticides?
I think part of the answer to that is trying to make the association. The difficulty is that there's so many different kinds of factors that can affect all of those basic biochemical processes. And we could spend a great amount of time and effort and money in going after pesticides, for example. But the issue is, if we're wrong in making those associations, we may have spent our money
Well, I
not
know how I'm going to
wisely.
spend my time avoiding it.
Well, thank you very much for being here. Join us next show. Thank you very much. It was
Good to have you
very
on the show.
informative. There's so much information. you know?
Good to have you on the show.
Yeah.